democracy, doesn't have control, and that's
makes sense to me.
no, that's exactly the truth. So they nationalized the bank in 1938, and it didn't do much the first year, but then the war came along,
Okay.
and it came out of hibernation and really sprang into action and started creating very, very large sums of money for the government of Canada at near zero cost. I don't know if it's necessary to explain how that happened or not, but their net cost was near zero. It was just the cost of administration deducted.
Well, I'm just thinking about before the Second World War, the Depression was on, and there was very high unemployment. There were no jobs in the country.
Right.
And then we went from, all of a sudden, through the war, through the use of this policy and the Bank of Canada, to completely reinventing and industrializing the whole country.
Absolutely. From nothing happening to everything happening, we hit a historic low of 1% unemployment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And think about that, because I don't know what our stated unemployment rate is today, but there are so many people
Between
that would
7 and
love to
8%,
have jobs
yeah.
that just can't find them
Right.
these
Yeah, and
days.
worse, 1 million young people between age 15 and 25 without jobs. That's awful.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yes.
And that's the reason we've got to do something about it. But it's interesting, if they had done what our group is recommending in 1930, there would have been no Great Depression.
Exactly. And maybe no need for a war.
Well, hopefully, yes.
Yeah. So now things have turned bad, obviously, from all that growth during and after the war to where we are today. Something happened.
Well, we had this same system after the war. It got us out of the Depression through the war, and after the war it helped finance the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Trans-Canada Highway and the great new airport terminals that we built. And in addition to that, help us lay the foundation for our Medicare and our Social Security systems, which were the envy of the world. And things were going swimmingly
Yes.
until 1974. And in 1974, the rules were changed, and it's been downhill ever since. Because in 1974, there was very little unemployment, a little bit, but not much. There was not one food bank in Canada,
Wow.
and today there are almost 2,000.
Wow.
Tuition fees were reasonable. Our Medicare system was well funded. That was the situation in '74. So the Bank of Canada adopted new rules. It bypassed our needs and started taking its orders from the Bank for International Settlements in Zurich, Switzerland.
That happened in 1974.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we became a member of a committee over there that sets the
Okay.
rules for the world. And I
Okay.
guess we went to our heads. And so we adopted two decisions that the Bank for International Settlements made. First, to adopt the ideas of Milton Friedman, which was basically a deregulated system. And he was interesting because he went from someone who recommended 100% cash reserves nearly all of his life to someone who went for zero cash reserves.
Wow.
You have to wonder about the judgment of someone
Well, that's pretty extreme.
who jumps from 100 to zero. Anyway, that was the first decision that they made.
Okay.
And the second one was to stop providing cheap money to governments. And that is when everything started going downhill. Well, then the third thing they did was they decided that they were in charge of controlling inflation. So Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Federal Reserve System, the U.S., decided in 1980-81 to put monetarism, Friedmanism, to the ultimate test. He raised interest rates to 18 or 20% and came within about, I think it was 5 hours of destroying the whole world financial system. In Canada, not to be outdone, we put ours up to 22%. And it just slows everything down.
Wow.
The economy crashed. I think we lost almost 700,000 jobs. People who were working before wiped out. And people lost their houses and their businesses and their farms, sometimes after 4 or 5 generations in the family. And it was just dreadful. But then those are the social consequences. The economic consequences were that people who are unemployed don't pay taxes. And the government still has to see that they don't starve, which means they're higher costs. So you have a deficit, a huge deficit.
Okay.
And then you roll that over into debt. And with interest rates at those levels, the debt doubles every 4 years. And that was the beginning. Until then, we had had a stable debt to GDP ratio for about 35 years, and it just started taking off like an airplane going up, towards the mountains. And we've never really recovered from it. We started to recover a little bit, and then John Crow, our new governor of the bank, in 1990, decided to do it to us all over again. And we have never recovered from these two terrible, dreadful recessions, which were deliberately brought on by the government of Canada and created all of the debt that we have today. And Ellen Brown, who is a member of our international group trying to change the system, was talking one day, and she said, "Paul, do you know how much interest the Canadian people have paid on the debt that was created unnecessarily?" And I said, "No." She said, $1 trillion. I said, "Ellen, I love you dearly, but I think you're putting me on." So I sent a missive to the Parliamentary Research Group, and one of the few benefits of being a Privy Councillor is you have access to their research group, and asked how much interest did the Canadian people pay on the federal government debt from 74-75 to 2010-11. The answer, $1,100 billion.
Wow.
Can you imagine what we could do with that much money?
Wow.
And that's money that we didn't have to pay, and now the Canadian taxpayers are being increasingly heavily asked to pay that money.
We still pay it.
Yeah.
And it works out if you divide it out. I took an average workforce for of those years. It's just a ballpark thing, not terribly accurate, but close enough. I think it cost every person in the labor force about $87,000 if they worked those 37 years.
And I'm just thinking, everybody that's watching this, anybody that owes money as a student loan, or anybody that wishes they were making more money, or anybody that can't find a job and wishes they could, these are people that are all being affected by this policy decision.
Every single one of them, every single person. Doesn't matter if they're First Nations needing more money for health care or for housing, or students whose tuition is so high that they have to go deeply in debt and never get out of it, for a long time. Everybody is affected. Every single person in the whole country is affected. Okay. And that's the reason we have to have a new system.
All right. Well, it's almost like, we talked about the global financial problems, the meltdown of 2007. I mean, it seems like we're still teetering on the brink of some kind of global financial
disaster,
collapse.
Yeah.
And we are teetering on the brink, and worse than that, we're not really growing.
Yeah.
We're not growing fast enough to employ the young people that I was talking about. And
there's big social consequences to that too. That is a whole other interview.
Well, sure. In Europe, people marching in the streets. In England, everywhere, it's a very precarious situation, and it's getting so long now. It's almost the length of the Great Depression, and will, unless we do something. It will probably exceed in length the Great Depression if we don't act right away.
Wow.
And just think about people's lives, how they're affected, and how the suffering of people who just don't have enough money to pay those bills every month, and how there's more and more of those people every day, and the homeless people on the street. The problem we didn't have 30, 40 years ago?
Positively.
Okay, Paul. Now, you got a solution to this.
That's right.
And we want to hear.
I've been working on it.
Let's have some good news, because this is pretty depressing.
Yeah, well, I've written 13 books, and I've never written a book complaining about the situation without providing a solution. Don't say that they're all perfect, but I really sort of dislike people saying, well, the world's going all to you-know-what. And then say there's no way out of it.
Yeah.
Because there's got to be a way out. And there is a way out. And what it really is adopting a variation of what we did from 39 to 74. Okay. And we know it works because it worked then. So what we're proposing, and this is a group of people who have been studying this problem, is that we would ask the federal government to have what we call a new social contract between the government of Canada and the people of Canada, and that it would involve changing the system and going back to what we had in that period, which was really sharing the money creation function between the Government of Canada and the private banks. That's what they did for those years until 74. So go back to that system of sharing. But first of all, we would prime the pump and get the economy up and running and provide jobs for people. So part of the solution is to have the Government of Canada immediately print 15 $10 billion share certificates in Canada.
Okay.
Non-redeemable, non-transferable, and check with the Department of Justice to see if they would qualify as collateral for the Bank of Canada to issue new money.
Okay.
And if yes, okay, and if no, change the Bank of Canada Act. And then to order the Bank of Canada to take the shares and create $150 billion and deposit it in the Government of Canada's bank accounts.
Okay.
On the understanding that it would be split 50-50 between the Government of Canada and the provinces and territories on a per capita basis.
Okay.
And also with the understanding that the provinces and territories would come to the relief of the hard-pressed municipalities, like Toronto, for example, which has so many things to do and so little money to do it.
Build a subway.
Well, that's for sure.
Just one example. We all know we need it.
Take down the Gardner.
Yeah.
Develop the port lines. You know, you can go on and on
and
forever.
Put all those people to work
yes.
that would
Fix
love to have jobs.
Right. And then there's another thing that has to be done simultaneously, and that is we have to reverse the decision that Parliament made in 1991 about cash reserves.
Yes.
And give the Minister of Finance the right to establish cash reserve requirements for the private banks up to a maximum of 34%. And the reason for that is to prevent inflation. Because as soon as you open your mouth and talk about government created money, people say, oh, it'd be wild inflation, it'd be roaring inflation. Not true. It is a myth, a total myth. Because money is money, and it's the amount of money that's created, not who creates it, that makes the difference. But they have brainwashed just about everybody to believe that it would be like, you know, getting the Great Plague or something. So they have to have that. And then to repeat this process for 7 years, increasing the cash reserves 5% each year, and creating about $150 billion or $125 each year, until the banks then have 34% cash reserves. And after that, to split the money creation function, 34% with the Government of Canada and 66% with the banks. And that would work for everybody. The government would have enough to balance their budgets, federal, municipal, and provincial, and still provide all of the real needs of the people that we've been discussing, and without, well, actually they could lower taxes, and without any deficits. They could balance their budgets every year, no need for deficits. And then as soon as the system was up and running, they would have surplus cash for a while during those 7 years, which they could use to start paying down the existing debt. And by the end of the 7 years, the federal government should be able to pay down about 1/3 of its existing debt, which means lower taxes because less interest to be paid.
Right.
Now the bottom line is we know it works because it worked when we did it before.
So it's a proven model.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and you know, I think some kind of policy. I notice on the Bank of Canada website they have no mention of a full employment policy, which means that people are suffering and they're not able to pay their taxes even.
Yes, and it's not a factor when they're looking for a new governor either. They've forgotten their purpose. They came into being in 1935 at the insistence of the farmers of Western Canada and the unemployed people who were being let down by the banking system. So the idea was we'll have a central bank and that will get the banking system to somehow work for our benefit,
right,
at least to bail us out somehow. Well, it didn't work until the war came along. But then it worked, and it showed that it will work. And as I said, if it had been done in 1930, there wouldn't have been any Great Depression.